guests are live on Facebook, so you could also view. What should people take and not take to the shelters? That's something that will come up as well. Just some of the questions that we will seek answers to. Let me go to the studio and welcome my guests. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Talking Points.
Good morning to you, Ivona, and good morning to the listeners of DBS Radio.
All right, Fitzroy Pascal, it is a pleasure to have you on. Not too long ago, you were on. In fact, for a few times now, since the hurricane season started, the ODM has seen it fit to come on and talk to us. So it's a pleasure to have you on. Fitzroy Pascal, you would have touched a little on the issue of shelters. But bring us just up to speed before I go to local government commissioner, because I think he will share the brunt of the discussion here this morning when we focus on shelters. But I'm sure, of course, the ODM can just give us an update as to what they are seeing in terms of shelter management, our level of readiness, and so on.
Yes, Ivona. Well, the last time we were here, we were really focusing on the possible impact of the tropical cyclone number 2. So we are happy here. We are happy to be here today and to say that we are meeting during peacetime, because we don't want it to seem that every time we come here is to preach the gloom. So we are happy here. We are happy to be here today and to speak to the many listeners of your radio station on just shelter management and what people should do in a shelter management setting, what they should, especially what they should bring along to the shelter, not only depending on what the system has in place, but only it's their responsibility to bring along necessities when they come to a shelter. As I said in my last interview with you, the national system is in a state of readiness. We are as ready as can be, and all the other sectors are in a state of general preparedness. So we saw it fit to bring along Mr. Tuse today, who is the chair of the Emergency Shelter Subcommittee, and he will elaborate more on exactly what what is going on with shelter management in Dominica as we speak.
Glenroy Tuse, good morning. Have you come bearing good news?
Good morning, Ivona. Good morning to you, and good morning to your listeners to DBS Radio, both here and abroad. It's always a pleasure to be here to, give information and to share very important information with the listening public. Well, it depends on how you view good news. There's always good news, and certainly, I would coin it better news as opposed to good news, better news. And as I said, it's always a pleasure to be here to disseminate information to the general public.
All right, better news. Bring us up to date in terms of our shelters. How many shelters are we looking at? What can you tell us about rehabilitation of some of these shelters, renovation, opening of recent shelters? I know we would have spoken on that on another forum when, of course, the Cooperative Division was observing its anniversary. But bring us up to date as to what we have now, what entails.
Okay. But before I begin, let me just give a general overview of shelter management. Of course, one of the fundamental functions of disaster risk reduction or disaster management is about saving lives, and to a lesser extent property. And so if we're talking about saving lives, there has to be a mechanism so as to ensure the safety and security of the citizenry. Hence the importance and significance of shelter management. It's really to provide a safety net, so to speak, when we are impacted by adverse weather and climatic events. And so certainly I need to say that we have seen a dramatic improvement in terms of our shelter management capacity and stock in Dominica. For example, we have seen a decrease in the shelter needs, and we have also seen an increase in our shelter capacity. So I'll give you some statistics.
Yeah, explain why you say that.
I'll give you some statistics. And basically, that has been as a result of the overall government housing revolution program, where government assisted individuals and families in the improvement and enhancement of their homes post Hurricane Maria. Also, with the construction of several apartment buildings, most recent being the Riverside apartment in Roseau, that has in fact allowed families to so to speak have a safe haven in terms of riding or the crisis or the storms that may occur. So as a result of that, we have seen a steady decrease in the shelter needs for Dominica, and consequently, with the recent commissioning of the 2 regional shelters in Jimit and Casibros, we have seen an increase in our shelter capacity. So I'll give some statistics now. For example, in 2021, we had done an assessment, a shelter needs assessment, and we had come up with a figure of 3,931 people to be sheltered in emergency shelters. That's for 2021. In 2022, we have seen a decrease in the shelter needs, moving from 3,931 in 2021 to 3,640 in 2022. So certainly that is good news. We've seen a decrease in the number of persons who would require to be taken to designated emergency shelters. Additionally, we have seen an increase, as I said, with the advent of the 2 regional shelters that were recently commissioned in Jimit and Casibros. We have seen an increase in our shelter capacity. So we have moved, for example, of a shelter capacity in 2021 of 7,096 to island-wide a capacity of 8,200. And so if you are to make the analysis, our shelter capacity is way above nationally the number of persons required to be sheltered. As I indicated to you, we're talking of 3,640 people to be sheltered, and we're talking of a shelter capacity island-wide of 8,200. However, there are communities, and we have made the arrangement, there are some communities without emergency shelters, and arrangements have been made for some of those persons to be taken to other communities. So we have made arrangements for the entire country.
So you're telling me that even now there are communities where a shelter cannot be...
Yes. For example, I'll give you, well, we have about 6 of them. We have Kulibistri, and for reason that the school is okay structurally sound, but because of the vulnerability to the river, we can't have the school being used as an emergency shelter. So we are moving the Kulibistri people to the Monrachet Community Center. In Colio, a similar thing. The school is okay structurally sound, but it's pretty close again to the river. So because of that vulnerability, we cannot take the people. So we are moving some of the people. There's a neighborhood approach in Colio as well. We are taking some of those people to the Layu Regional Shelter. Similarly, we have places like Pishle. Because, of course, the situation with the river and its vulnerability, we are taking the Pishle people to the Pierre Child Secondary School. We are talking of Layu Park Sultan. We are taking them to the regional shelter in Jimit. A similar thing for Bonn. We are taking the people from Bonn to the Portsmouth Secondary School and as well the Dodan Primary School. And is anyone I've forgotten?
No,
that's right?
That's it.
Mero. Yes, Mero is the other one. So Mero, we are taking the people from Mero to the John Kelebulura Primary School. So these are the arrangements that we have for communities where we do not have designated emergency shelters. And
so we have implemented a strategy whereby these people could move.
Yes, in fact, what we've done, we are working closely with the local disaster committees in those communities when we're doing the transportation. We are also working with the transportation subcommittee. In fact, recently, just a few weeks ago, we had a meeting. Some chairs of subcommittees met with, and we sought to seek to address the gaps as it relates to transportation of persons to be taken to the emergency shelters. For example, we have a large number of persons to be taken from Pishle to the Pierre Child Secondary School, and so those arrangements are being put in place to ensure that as soon as we activate the shelters, that persons can be taken at the soonest to those emergency shelters. So by and large, we are seeing an improvement. I don't want to use the word drastic, but a gradual improvement in our shelter management capacity and needs in Dominica. And that is a good news compared to where we were in 2018. Over the last 4 years, we've made significant strides. And so we are very happy that we're in a better position today than we were 4 years ago. Having said that, though, we have seen as well an increase in the number of shelters available for the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. In 2021, we had 114 shelters available. In 2022, we have 118, and of course, that is largely as a result of the 2 regional shelters and, of course, and 1 or 2 schools that were recently renovated and enhanced so that they can, in fact, cater for the needs of persons requiring that. And as I said, as I indicated, the regional shelter, we need to place some emphasis on those because you're talking of, when I said about increasing the capacity, you're also referring to the fact that with the with the emergence of the 2 regional shelters, well, 3, including Jimit, including Layu, what we've done is basically to ease the burden on the use of schools, because if you know, and just to inform the general public, 45% of our shelters are schools, primary and secondary, and so we know the challenges when those facilities are occupied, you know, adversely impacting the ability of children to attend school and things of that nature. And so those 2 regional shelters will certainly ease the burden, because they are there for long term. And so when you're talking of a capacity of 500 Jimit and 300 Casibros, certainly that is going to help in terms of allowing us to have some certain level of freedom in terms of the use of our schools in Dominica for emergency shelters. So certainly I clearly believe and convinced that this will certainly help us in the future as we proceed in terms of ensuring that we provide a safe haven for the citizens. So in terms of shelters, we are saying that we are pretty pleased with the progress that we've made, and in that regard. I'm also to say that as well, and you mentioned it, that since Maria, we've been partnering with the International Organization for Migration, IOM, in the improvement and enhancement of emergency shelters. And that what's happened is that we have seen, in that initiative, we've seen over 27 shelters being enhanced. Well, over not 27, over 30. Over 30 shelters will be enhanced. And hence we're talking about retrofitted and improved and provided with alternative sources of energy. In addition to that, we have seen supplies. And we're talking, when we say supplies, we're talking about non-food items, right? Basic supplies. So we've seen that we've been able to equip those shelters with basic supplies. As I speak, we have provided supplies, basic supplies, to all community centers in Dominica. The most recent was the vehicles that we did last week, providing them with stove, refrigerators, first aid kits, cots, hygiene set, kitchen sets, blankets. We even have gone as far as wheelchair. So we provided some wheelchair because we know in our communities there are persons with certain disabilities that will require to be taken to the emergency shelters. And so we have provided that. And we do have supplies to provide to, as I indicated, many of our shelters are schools. And so while we have the supplies, one of our challenges is to ensure, because some of the schools really do not have the storage capacity. And so what we're doing in collaboration with the Office of Disaster Management, I'm hoping pretty soon there are 2 warehouses that will soon be commissioned, one at Cotton Hill in Portsmouth, and the other in Casibros, where we can pre-position those supplies. And I want to reiterate, the supplies is not food, it's non-food. All right, so we want to make it clear to the general public that when we say supplies, we do not want anybody to misunderstand really, to indicate that we have food preposition.
I still want to add to what Tusa is saying, and to say that we still require the general public to walk with their basic supplies for at least 3 days. Just to add that.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, I will further strengthen that. So while we're saying that, we also want to ensure that the general public understand. And I said in earlier discussions that there are 3 areas of responsibilities as far as disaster risk reduction is concerned. There is the family responsibilities. The families have a responsibility for their safety. There is the community responsibility, and there is the state responsibility. And so we are taking it from a standpoint of the family responsibility. So we are saying, and I'm happy Fitzroy mentioned it, that we are saying that while we provide the non-food item supplies to the shelters, we are also expecting the community people and the people who are going to be taken to the shelters to come with their basic supplies. So come with your masks, come with your hand sanitizers, come with your supplies. We are saying that people should come with their supplies in terms of water, sufficient water for at least 12 to 36 hours. Let's say a day or 2.
3 days.
Let's say 3 days. So you come in with sufficient water, some dry foods, some biscuits, some canned foods. You come in the shelter with that supply to allow you to be self-sufficient for at least 3 days. Because it's, in the first instance, our shelter management over objective at that time is really to ride the storm. And riding the storm will take you between 12 to 48 hours, as the case may be. And certainly once the all clear given, we expect people to go back at their homes to do an assessment. And of course, the state mechanism will come into play. But we want to stress on the importance of people taking supplies, their own supplies, to the shelters. Of course, we know in our communities and there may be some people who may not have the way or the mechanism, so to speak, to afford those things. But certainly, we're encouraging the general public to come with your mask, come with your hand sanitizers, come with your food supplies to last you for at least 3 days. And importantly, we are encouraging people to come with your medication.
Yeah, so let me just give to a break and just reiterate the emergency kit. So one should create an emergency kit with your basic supplies, which you should take to the shelter. And that should include at least 1 gallon of water per person per day for at least 3 days. You have non-perishable food items like your canned foods, your crackers, your juice, your personal hygiene items, your COVID-19 protective and sanitizing items like your mask, your hand sanitizer, or your rubbing alcohol, your medication especially for the elderly persons, your first aid kit. You should have some cash on hand, your important documents like your birth and marriage certificates, your insurance, your land titles, etc., emergency contacts, and then if you have babies, your baby supplies, portable chargers like your power banks, flashlights or solar lights, and battery-operated radio with extra batteries.
Mm-hmm. So while one expects an emergency shelter to be equipped with basic supplies, it does not mean that you have to just go with your hands empty. There are certain things that you have to take along with you when you're going to a shelter.
Oh yes, we continue.
Exactly.
In fact, a few years ago, I coined the phrase, "Don't come to the shelters with your hands swinging." So you come with something because that is your responsibility. The state mechanism will come in when it has to come in, but the individual and the families have a responsibility. And so we're encouraging people moving forward. We are not expecting people to come to the shelters empty-handed, as we say.
All right. We're on to Talking Points. You could call us 1-800-327-448-328-4 616-1327. You could send a WhatsApp on the 616-1327 number. We are speaking with Mr. Glenroy Tusa, who is Dominica's local government commissioner, but not just that. He is also one who has a very integral role in shelter management on the island. And we also have with us Disaster Preparedness Coordinator, National Disaster Preparedness Coordinator, Fitzroy Pascal. We're into Talking Points. We'll welcome your calls as well. What Glenroy is telling us essentially is that there is a significant drop in the number of people who will need accommodation in the event of a disaster. And this surely is good news when we consider what has been put in place to arrive at that stage. And he also indicated that an assessment sort of was done to determine how many people roughly will fall into this vulnerable category, right? Did I get you clearly in terms of the assessment?
Yes,
but even before you answer that, let me go to the telephone. I think we have a call on the line. It is Talking Points. Good morning. Hello?
Good morning.
Yes,
Hello.
good morning.
Yes, welcome to you. Yes, and good morning once again.
Okay.
I would just like to point out a little point.
Sure.
Yes, we need shelter. We need all what we have to get the shelter, and we have to put everything in place. But water is life. You need water to drink your medication. We can't depend on buying bottled water. We have to secure our water. But I just understand and like a message to the WASCO that we have 3 months now we have no water in Savanpai, in Kalibishi. And hurricane season is coming. There is no rain. We can't collect any water. We don't know what to do anymore. That is very bad. That we have been suffering for the long 50 years now with that same problem in the WASCO in Savanpai. And they can't rectify the problem. Not even in the night we get in water. My God, when our tank water finish, what are we going to do?
Have you called the WASCO? Have you tried to reach them?
I called them, and the response they give me that's a negative response. You cannot tell me wait on a tank. But when the tank finish, the water finish in the tank. For 3 months you your toilet, you have to bathe, you have to wash, you have to wash it. The water have to finish. But we're not getting even in the night to fill our tank.
Okay, I know.
So what is the problem?
Yeah, I think DOWAS could be in a program very, very soon. I hope that they can address that as well. But I take your point. I like how you tied it as well, because she started with in terms of what we need at the shelters, but then she said, but water is very essential as well. But there's no water in her community. I know that's something that a lot of people are grappling with, especially around that time, in terms of water shortage, intermittent interruption, in fact, of the water supply. But that happens. But keep calling the WASCO and let's see if that problem can be resolved. So Glenroy, I was saying, in terms of the outlook, it looks favorable. It looks encouraging in terms of what you told us. The fact that not many people like before will need shelter in the event of a disaster, because a lot has been put in place, even after Hurricane Maria, for us to arrive at this stage that we are at this time, and an assessment sort of has been undertaken.
Earlier, we are in a better place. As the year progresses, we continue to make gradual progress. So we are in a better position in 2022 than we were in 2021, and that, in many respects, is good news. However, there's always room for continued dialogue and improvement and enhancement. And as we continue to emphasize, there is the individual and family responsibility that is critical in that process, because the individual and the family has a responsibility to safeguard their own selves, to ensure that within the context of the family, there is a family disaster plan. We've been putting heavy emphasis since Maria on the need for families to strengthen their family disaster plans. And of course, Fitzroy mentioned the whole disaster kit and what have you. So it's important that families understand that they have that responsibility to prepare a plan for the family.
But what happens at the facilities outside of the hurricane season? Are they there for like a multi-purpose? Are these facilities being used outside the hurricane season? I know in the past we have used a lot of the school buildings, sometimes even church basements. So in terms of the centers, the major ones, what are they being used for even outside of the hurricane season?
Yes, well, I could start with the Layo emergency shelter. Currently, it's being utilized as a place for the people of that community to engage themselves in activities such as computer education with the youth skills development division. Also, just recently, the Castle Bruce emergency shelter, which was recently commissioned, there was a function held, I think, the graduation of the Castle Bruce Secondary School. So definitely, we have put plans in place so that these facilities are being utilized during peacetime. We refer to it as peacetime.
Okay,
but
go ahead.
But the fact remains that they are emergency shelters, and if we have an emergency situation, they will be used as a shelter.
Okay, let's go to the telephone. We have a call on the line. You are on Good Morning Talking Points.
Hello, good morning.
Hi.
Just a concern.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I was wondering about the apartments, the newly constructed apartments the government built. I'm wondering if they are safe, if they are hurricane resilient.
Well, I'd like to believe that, but that's it? Okay, she was talking about if the apartments are hurricane resilient, the structural integrity of the apartments. I'm not sure if you'd want to speak on that, but I can remember at the handing over ceremony that was alluded to, the fact that these houses were built, with resilience in mind. So I would really like to believe that. As I speak, we have with us as well Mandela Christian. So Mandela, of course, will give us his remarks as he comes in on the program. But I'm not sure if any one of you want to address the issue of the resilience, what the caller just called about, mentioning, how strong these apartments are, Glenroy or Fitzroy Pascal, these apartments that were recently handed over.
Well, I'm not an engineer, so to speak, but based on the information that we have, the shelters were purposefully built.
Not the shelters.
The apartment buildings.
Yeah.
Were purposefully built with a heavy emphasis on resilience. Even what my understanding, even the windows are such that they has some resilient mechanism. All of the apartment buildings are what's up?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, concrete roof. So certainly, based on the information that I have, they were built with some level of resilience, and the intention is that they can withstand at least a category 5. So that is the information that I have based on the apartment buildings.
All right, it's Talking Points on DBS Radio. Let me welcome Mandela. Your opening remarks as you come in. Mandela, good morning.
Good morning, and good morning to all the listeners here on DBS Radio. Thanks for having me.
All right, Mandela, so we're looking at the issue of shelters. I'm sure you'd want to weigh in on this in terms of our level of preparedness.
Well, I'm sure it would have been mentioned that this year we are at a better standing when it comes to shelters in Dominica on a whole. I believe our shelter capacity has increased while our shelter needs has decreased. So that is good. We are also working on building capacity in terms of our shelter managers, or not just shelter managers, but we are moving from just training shelter managers into training shelter management teams. And that is one thing I would like to actually share on the preparation of shelter management teams, because it takes a whole team to run these facilities right now. It's not just one person coming and unlock the doors and hand over stuff. There are some other aspects that need to be considered, and we are ensuring that our volunteers or shelter management personnel are equipped with the knowledge and the skill sets to perform that duty, and that it is done in accordance with not just our national but international standards for providing humanitarian assistance in times of disasters.
Mm-hmm. So, Fisher, what I'm hearing from Mandela is essentially that the various organs, the various departments, the various teams are fully functional even at this time.
Yes, definitely, Ivona. I said it before and I'll say it again, that like Tusa said, there's always room for improvement, but in the general NEPO mechanism, we have been seeing improvement in the years gone by.
All right, it is Talking Points on DBS Radio. We are speaking with three gentlemen as we look at shelter management in Dominica within this hurricane season, within this COVID-19 environment as well, because COVID is still with us. COVID-19 is still with us. I understood that there's another strain that is highly transmissible as well. So all these things that we have to take into cognizance, even as we put our strategies in place for the hurricane season. A lot should have been done already, from the family standpoint, from individual look as well. People have to ensure that they put the necessary mechanisms in place during this time. We are very, very vulnerable. There are some areas, as we understood from Glenroy Tuse, in terms of their level of vulnerability, not even a facility, a shelter, can be pointed out, in certain communities, and I think you would have mentioned 6. So the onus is on all of us to ensure that we do what we have to do. We take the necessary precautions, of course, in the event of a disaster. We understood very early that the prediction is for an above normal season. Now, Glenroy, let us look at in terms of the teams that Mandela would have mentioned, the various organs. How often do the teams meet in terms of preparing for a disaster, of course, if it may occur? Let us look at the teams and how often they would meet. I'm not sure if you're not hearing me, Glenroy. If you're not hearing me clearly.
Yeah, go ahead. Repeat.
Okay, so I was asking about, just to follow up with what Mandela would have said. I was trying to get a feel of how often do the various departments meet. Of course, and I know NEPO is the umbrella body, but you have various organs. How is this going in terms of the meetings?
Oh, I guess you're referring to, you said 2 things in terms of shelter teams. You also indicated I'm guessing that you're referring to the subcommittees. But in terms of the shelter teams, as Mandela indicated, that we are moving, because what we used to have in the past is basically a two-man, two personnel. Yeah. Yeah, with a key. Basically, the emphasis was just basically ensuring that people come in, opening and stuff like that. We are moving beyond that and setting up in the communities teams. Shelter teams would comprise a number of people with specific responsibilities as it relates to shelter management, because shelter management is a broader part of disaster risk reduction, and not necessarily just opening the building and taking names and notes and that sort of thing. There has to be a wide range of responsibilities and involvement, and so the approach is to engage the disaster management committees. Similarly to the disaster committees in Dominica, and the communities have a similar structure to NIPO. They have their subcommittees, and shelter management will be one of those subcommittees, and we encourage in shelter teams. So you would have the shelter manager and assistant manager, heading those teams, but you have other personnel, persons. Over the years, the Office of Disaster Management, local government, and Red Cross, we've been engaged in a number of training programs for communities in Dominica, looking at specific areas. As we speak, since 2021, we've been having what we call a capacity building training program. We call it a Community Emergency Readiness Initiative, where we seek to build the capacity in terms of disaster risk reduction at the community level in several communities in Dominica, most vulnerable, more vulnerable, and things of that nature. And so one of the areas that has been touched is the whole issue of shelter management and encouraging the whole shelter team approach. So that in itself is important. In fact, just last week, the shelter team from Layu met to evaluate, to do an evaluation, because there was I'm sure that will come up, the CIMEX exercise that we had, a simulation exercise at the Layu Regional Shelter. And certainly the team met looking at its own weaknesses, its own strength, and of course the gaps as it relates to enhancing the shelter management prospect for that particular emergency shelter in Layu. And so even from a NIPO subcommittee standpoint, we have seen the need for greater collaboration among the various subcommittees. And so recently we saw the need for the welfare, transportation, food and general supply, and shelter. So the four chairs met specifically to look at the issues relating to shelter management. How do we prepare and how do we ensure that our shelter management experience is enhanced? And so we had discussions as it relates to the food supplies for those shelters. We had the issue of transportation, and I mentioned earlier, how do we take the people from Pishle to Granby, and how do we take the people from Koliho to the Layu emergency shelter? And so we clearly recognize the role that the transportation subcommittee plays in that regard. And what we've done, even to advance it, the transportation subcommittee was provided with the assessment, the entire assessment of the number of people required to be taken from the for communities by community, and the arrangement that is in place to move those persons. We've also gone ahead and provided contact for every community in Dominica to the transportation subcommittee, so that they can understand, what it is. We do expect there will be a relationship with fire and ambulance as well in that regard. But certainly we are taking shelter management a step further, and see the need for us we've even said we need to even expand our discussion as it relates to shelter management, and look at even the police and even fire, and looking at PI, the Public Information and Education Subcommittee, because we believe it's important. We're talking about saving people's lives, and as we refer to that, we're talking of the Climate Resilient Recovery Plan 2020-2030. One of the greatest goals is zero fatalities, and how do we attain these zero fatalities is in the manner in which we organize at the community level, at the district level, in terms of our disaster risk reduction approaches.
All right, let's go back to the telephone. All right, we lost that call. We are to Talking Point. You're also live on Facebook, and I have three gentlemen with me in studio as we discuss shelter management during this hurricane season. Glenn Wright will say, I can recall in the past and very early in the season, there would be a list of shelters that would be placed at in strategic locations and even on the newspapers. What entails now? I know things have changed, obviously, but what entails now? How can people look for the various shelters in the community? Where, in fact, can they look for this?
Okay, one of the things that we have, as I said, we have to take it from a community standpoint. So one of the emphasis that we're placing now, and even as we go through the training program, we are allowing people to understand and know where the shelter is. That is important. If every individual in the community knows where the shelter is, that makes life much easier. And oftentimes people say, I'm not even sure. So we are encouraging people to understand and to know where the shelter is. And we are pretty convinced that most people, the majority of the population, know where the shelter is. One of the remarks that oftentimes comes up is the shelter is too far. There's nothing about the far of the shelter. The fact remains that a lot of the time, sometimes we do things late minute, and so sometimes people believe to move now, because it's already late, to move now, the shelter seems to be far. But it's close, because within the community. The thing is, we've been, over the years, we've been doing a lot of publication on the newspaper, but we are certainly posting it on the ODM website and the Government of Dominica website, so that people can of course, get that information on the ODM website and the Government of Dominica website on the shelters for the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. But as I said as well, that we are also ensuring that the community people know where the shelters are. And we are pretty happy that most people are aware of the shelters.
All right, let's go back to the telephone. I think we lost that call. That person can call back. We are looking at shelter management. So it's fair to say, Mandela, Christian, and Fitzroy Pascal, it's fair to say that preparations for the hurricane season since Maria are more intense.
Oh yes, definitely. We of course will learn from our past experiences, and we always seek to improve and enhance our operations. Every year we take stock of what happened the year before, not only nationally, but we learn from our neighbors as well, from the region. Even if we are not impacted, but probably a sister island may have been impacted, and they may have learned some lessons or done something, some innovative things to address the disaster that we can benefit from. So we do our best to coordinate with them, to communicate with them, and to pool in those lessons and see how best we could replicate and apply them in Dominica.
All right, let's go to the telephone. We have someone on the line. You are on. Good morning.
Good morning. I want to thank all of you for this very informative activity. I had internet problems, so I checked in late, but I am appreciative. I'm hearing good things. There's one of you gentlemen whose face I don't know yet, but I will get to know that. What I want you to know is, do you have special arrangements, or rather, what are your special arrangements for seniors, for the elderly?
Interesting. Thank you, Ophelia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Arrangements for the elderly, and we can also look at arrangements for the disabilities as well, people with physical disabilities.
Yeah, well, interestingly, Caller, thanks for your commendation. Interestingly, the senior citizens come as part of a vulnerable group, right? So we pay special attention, and I'm not saying that on the basis that we kind of not looking at the wider population, but we have to pay special attention to our vulnerable groups. So we're talking of persons with disabilities, our senior citizens, and that is why it is very important. When we are moving people to the shelters, that's why it's important that we have the list. So you've done the assessment, and within the assessment, we take into consideration the person's vulnerability in the sense of physical and otherwise. And so when we are moving, the first set of people whom we move to the shelters, of course, we expect the families as well to assist us in that regard, is our senior citizens. And clearly, one of the things, and I will come to the later on the shelter rules and regulations, and of course our guidelines relating to COVID, but we certainly understand the tremendous concerns and challenges for our senior citizens. But when we're moving people to the shelters, these are the first set of people that we move. Those and persons with disabilities, because we clearly understand they have their own challenges, and we have to ensure. One of the things that we want people to help us do, because we know in some instances there are elderly, there are senior citizens with caretakers. And one of the challenges that we have had over the years is that oftentimes we take them to the shelters, or they take them to the shelters alone. And so we're encouraging as far as possible, if the caretakers or someone who has that responsibility for the seniors, to come and assist us in that regard, because it can be a little difficult for us sometimes, because, and not only that, some of our senior citizens are more comfortable people that they are working with them, because they may have their own physical and other challenges. And so this is the approach that we're hoping to take, that if possible, if we can get that sort of arrangement so that the caretakers can. But if not, we always ensure that we do our best in terms of caring for our senior citizens. And that is why we are very strict in terms of our rules and regulations, and I will define them later. But I'm happy for the caller making that point, that certainly we are very much cognizant of our seniors and persons with disability.
But if I may chime in as well, just last month, a few weeks ago actually, on June 16th and 17th, we conducted a simulation exercise in Layu, at the Layu Regional Shelter. And it was to test basically the evacuation and shelter management operations at the regional shelter facility. And the reason for this was because we are now, as you know, the government is now building regional shelter facilities, these purpose-built facilities. And we really wanted to test the operations within that setting, within that context. So, and we invited partners from the disabled groups, the Dominican Association of Persons with Disabilities, the Council on Aging, the youth, the gender affairs, and a number, Red Cross, IOM, a number of stakeholders were invited, because it's not just an ODM thing or a local government thing. And we had volunteers stay in the shelter 24 hours. They stayed overnight. And I really must commend the volunteers, because we got a cross-section of volunteers, from the young all the way to the elderly. There were some elderly persons who actually stayed in the shelter. They slept overnight, and they went through the entire scenario with us. And the purpose for that was to basically see how they adapt and how they are able to cope within that setting. And we did learn a lot of lessons from them, just the experience, the feedback that they gave us. And some of these things, some things that we are able to change right now, some immediate things, and we will be doing our best to implement some of the things one time. Other things we are taking into consideration for some things probably are a bit more, well, we need more resources and more time to really put in place. But definitely we have taken all these recommendations into advisement. Under advisement, and we will be doing our best to implement them at some point. Coincidentally, just tomorrow we will have actually the after action review for the exercise, where we'll be presenting to the officials the findings of that exercise, so that we could have, put forward a plan of action for implementing those recommendations over the coming months.
You spoke about volunteers. Among the volunteers, are there people who are specially trained, equipped to give assistance to the elderly, to people with disabilities? Do you have nurses on board, health practitioners? Help us understand.
So let me just take a stab at that, Ivona. Just to use the MAO setting led by Mr. Davidson John, and I'll answer two of your questions. They have meetings weekly, on a weekly basis, and they visit the new regional emergency shelter, and they have been making recommendations at their meetings. And they have a medical team. So it's not just one person, a one-man show. They have a complete team. I think the last time I saw them, there were like 15 persons. There are 2 nurses on board. So they have people ranging from heavy equipment operator who can operate the generator at the shelter, to nurses, to medical persons who can give advice on medical issues, and also address vulnerable groups being housed at the shelters, if needs be.
All right. We don't have that much time. I want to look at the shelter rules and regulations. Glenroy too said that is very important. I think we would have touched on it a little earlier in terms of what people can bring and what they cannot bring. But let us go through the rules and the regulations. Guide us.
Yes. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. Let me just, before I go into it, let me just inform the listening and the viewing public that we will be, as we've been doing, to strategically put the shelter rules at strategic locations at the shelters. It's not just simply, so we're going to putting them up so that very up front as you come in, you will see it, and at strategic locations within the shelter. And the reason for that is to ensure that everyone understands and knows the rules that govern and the regulation that governs the shelter. What we are doing is we are working now with IOM to see if we can translate that, because we have a migrant population. And so we are hoping that we can translate the shelter rules into the Haitian Creole and Spanish so that our migrant population, and even the Chinese as well, because we have a population from the People's Republic of China as well. So we are looking at those possibilities so that we can have them strategically located. And when we look at the shelter rules and regulation, they are really basically in 3 areas. It's law and order, health and sanitation, and safety and fire. And so we're talking about notwithstanding the fact we're in an emergency, all existing laws of the country will be enforced. So don't believe, I want our people to understand, don't believe because you're in an emergency that you can simply do what you want. The laws of the land will be enforced. And we want to inform the listening and the viewing public that the shelterists, the persons who are going to be sheltered, the shelterists we call them, they will use the shelter area assigned to them by the shelter manager. We are going to assign areas. We're trying as much as possible to bring families together. But areas will be assigned to individuals and families, and we are expecting people to confine or to oblige to the assigned areas for the families and the individuals. Of course, we are going to have personnel conflict, and one of the things that we're doing is we know that the police will be heavily burdened, so we can't expect policemen to be at shelters. So that's why the shelter team is critical. And within that shelter team, we have security personnel to ensure the security and safety of every individual at the shelter. We're expecting this sort of team approach even from the shelterists themselves. We're expecting them to be engaged. I mean, if you are sheltering in an area, you expect it to be kept clean. And that is the responsibility of the shelterists, to keep their area clean and tidy at all times, to keep sleeping areas clean at all time, to ensure that whatever waste that we have, they are properly disposed of in garbage can or garbage tin or plastics or whatever the case may be, ensure that they are properly disposed of. And people must also do their own personal hygiene. I mean, nobody has to tell you that you have to do your laundry or the bathe and stuff like that. We expect that to happen. We want to importantly say, and we keep stressing, that no pets will be allowed in the shelter. So we are asking families to ensure that they make some arrangement for their pets. I know people like their little dogs and their cats and those sort of animals. So within your family plan, you're expected to make that sort of preparation for your pets, because no pets, absolutely no pets, will be allowed at the emergency shelters. And so in terms of our safety and otherwise, we're saying no weapons, absolutely no weapons. And weapons, we're talking about knife, eye prick. Well, we know the guns and everything, but the knives, the ice prick, the can container, the can opener. There are people who use can openers. All of those things, we consider them to be weapons. So no, absolutely no weapons will be allowed in the shelters. So
is there a search that will be done? How do you go into determine
Obviously, I mean, we have to say that. Obviously, we have to ensure that people have to empty their pockets. Okay. And that's, we're saying it very early so that people understand, so that you don't come and say, but nobody told us that and now you're doing that. No, we are saying that to the general public, that we are not going to do a search like police, but we expect that there will be a reasonable understanding that, you know, just empty out the pocket for us, please. That's all. We're not going to force people, because that's not the mood really, to force people to do things. But we want it to be as cordial as possible, that people will not be allowed to come to the shelter with weapons. Absolutely no smoking is permitted in the shelter. We're saying if people want to smoke, you take a 5, as they say it, outside, and you do your smoking. But not absolutely, because we have persons who are not, you know, the smoking is not really for them. They can't take the smoke and sort of thing. So no smoking at the shelter. Absolutely no alcoholic beverages will be consumed within the shelter area. Like we said, we're not encouraging people to even take alcoholic beverages outside, because we know sometimes that intake of alcoholic beverage can be chaotic. And so we are avoiding all sort of chaotic events at our emergency shelters. We are also putting a heavily burden on shelters themselves, because they have to be the watchdogs to ensure that there's, to observe any potential fire within the shelter itself. And think, because we have a number of people who are going to be shelters, and there's sometimes certain things can happen. So we are expecting shelters themselves to be watchdogs in that regard. And that is why we're saying that we have to be each other's brother. We have to be each other's keeper. Our ultimate goal is to ride the storm, ride the impact. And of course, we must be in a prayerful mood, a joyful mood, but a mood to help each other along the way. We need to also say, since we are in the COVID period, and that is very important.
What about vaccination?
I will come to that. Whether you are vaccinated or not, you will be taken to the shelter. You will be allowed to come to the shelter. There's no restriction on whether you're vaccinated. And so I am coming now to the guidelines for COVID-19. We mentioned it earlier. Everyone will wear a mask in the emergency shelter. Every single person. And that's why we're encouraging people to come with your mask. Come with a supply of masks, because at all times, masks will be worn at the shelters. We are asking people as well to come with their personal mask. Come with your rubbing alcohol and hand sanitizer, because you have that responsibility to protect yourself. And of course, your family as well. We are saying that yes, we will provide some sanitization at the entrance, but people are encouraged as well to come to the shelters with their own supplies. I know we have lifted some protocols in terms of physical distancing, so we no longer have that. That is why we're saying that mask wearing is a mandatory at the shelters. I also indicated earlier that we'll be affording, for better enhancement of our shelter management experience, putting families together and providing a sheltered area for the shelterees as well. We are also telling shelterees that they are to avoid close contact with anyone showing symptoms of respiratory illness or any such coughing or sneezing or whatever the case may be. And of course, we have put a mechanism in place that if we notice that we have to isolate people. So we have within the shelter context to identify sorts of isolation areas within the shelter itself, so that we can isolate persons who are showing that those symptoms of COVID-19. And as we indicate importantly as well, it is the responsibility of everyone. So you have to be, even within the COVID context, we have to be each other's brother, each other's keeper. But I want to re-emphasize that whether you are vaccinated or not, you will be allowed to be taken to an emergency shelter. So that is not a situation whether you're vaccinated. However, we have a registration form that will be ensuring that we get information from each of the families who are entering the shelter. And that is important because we need to identify who's at the shelter for purposes afterwards, right? So that shelter registration form will have some information whether you are vaccinated or not. It's not necessarily to say whether you're vaccinated or not that you will not be taken to the shelter. It's just basically for us to know your status. So whether you're vaccinated and not vaccinated, or whether you've gotten your first dose, or that sort of thing. So it's basically just for information so that we understand. So some questions will be asked. We may ask about some of your health concerns and things of that nature. So we are encouraging the general public to cooperate with us, because it's important that we collect that data for informed decision making.
Let's go back to the telephone. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Ivos. Good morning, gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
Did you speak about the shelter for elderly? Can you repeat it, please?
Okay, we could emphasize
because
again.
Miss Ophelia is listening. And
Yes.
Like,
in fact, she called.
Oh.
And she the question that she asked was answered. So there are measures in place for the elderly and
for
people
the
with disabilities as well.
Okay, she got to you before me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm listening.
Okay, thank you. So, Glenroy, what if someone is leaving a shelter very early, during the passage of a storm, a hurricane, whatever, but a day after or 2 days after they can leave? Would they have to sign this registration that you speak about?
Oh, yes.
How do you determine how many people are still there?
Yeah, the thing is, and that is important. So we would take note when the person would have left. All right. So within the form that we have, we would show when the person has left the shelter. So there's a segment in the form that says the person has left the shelter and the date the person has left the shelter, and in what condition the person left the shelter. It's important that we understand in what condition that the person left the shelter. All right. So that is within the form itself. So we would have, for example, if let me give you just an imaginary figure. Let's say 70 people at the shelter, and the first day 50 people would have left. You would record on the form because there's a registration form of each family member and not every person in the shelter. What we do it by families. So the head of the household, and we would put the names of every family member. So we would have a form for each family and not each individual. For each family, there's a form. So the family would have the head of the household and all of the other family members. So when that family would have left, below the form would have when that person would have exited the shelter and in some respect, what condition. So when I say condition, instead that they were in good spirit, they left with all their belongings, things of that nature, so that we can capture that. One of the things that we have also developed is, along with Office of Disaster Management and IOM, is a shelter management information system. We've never had that before, where we seek to have it an online system that we seek to capture valuable data related to the shelters in Dominica.
Let's go back to the telephone for the final time. You're on. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
I was trying to get hold of Mr. Williams. He left already?
Okay, you're live on air. Hazard is not on air, and this time call 448-3282. We are discussing shelter management. We have approached the 10 o'clock already, but let's get closing remarks. Let's start with you, Mandela. Closing remarks as we end this very important discussion on shelter management. It's also interesting that you brought out the simulation exercise, which was held recently. But by the way, even before you give us your closing remarks, as far as the simulation exercises are concerned, have you all ever done a simulation exercise that would incorporate people at shelters and, what they should do and what they should not do? Have you ever, thought about this as well? Because this is important, because as I'm hearing, a lot of people come to shelters with things that they should not come with. Mm-hmm. I can recall someone calling sometime last year and saying that there was a guy with a boombox and he would be playing music loud at nights, and this is a no-no. So have you all ever incorporated into the training exercises, the simulation exercises that you have conducted, that aspect?
Yes, we have. And even to help inform the exercise, we had someone from St. Vincent and the Grenadines help us write the scenarios. And the reason for that is they recently dealt with sheltering after the volcanic eruption. So they had a massive shelter program ongoing. So we got some real life experiences, some things that actually happened, and we actually replicated those scenarios in the shelters. So we played them out, and we looked at how the shelter management team dealt with them. And we also generated some good recommendations for how we address those things. And also, we will also be doing a brief revision of some of the protocols to address some of those things or those incidents that may arise. But I know we have pressed for time. I just want to say in closing, just want to remind the public that the shelter is not a hotel. So when you come with your basic supplies. Don't come with your hands swinging and expect the shelter management team or the shelter to have everything for you. So there are some basic supplies that you need to work with, and Mr. Tusa and I'm sure Mr. Pascal would have mentioned a few of these things. Your medication is key. We don't have a pharmacist there, so come with any key medication that you need. And some food, some basic dry food and supplies for at least 3 days, because we don't store food at the shelters. The food and the ration, as we say, will come in afterwards. Afterwards. So don't come expecting a hotel and you expect to, your hot meals and everything to just be waiting one time as you enter. Yep. So we are encouraging people to come with your basic supplies. And of course, without going into too much detail, all that information can be found on the websites, on our social media pages, as to the checklist as to items you should work with at the shelters, without going to it in detail.
Fitzroy Pascal, let's hear from you as we close.
Yes, I'll go into the detail. So for me, preparedness is key, and we should all be in a state of preparedness and readiness for any eventualities. One should consider having their family emergency plan, your communications plan, and also that would form part of you would have your emergency kit. And I will go through the emergency kit contents again in detail. At least 1 gallon of water per person per day for at least 3 days. Non-perishable food items to include canned foods, crackers, etc. Your personal hygiene items, your COVID-19 protective and sanitizing items, your mask, your rubbing alcohol, your sanitizers, medication, particularly for the elderly, your first aid kit, some cash on hand, important documents, your birth and marriage certificates, your land titles, your emergency contacts, and then if you have a baby, your baby supplies, portable chargers, your flashlight, and battery-operated radios.
All right. Glenroy Tuse, closing remarks quickly.
Okay, just want to encourage the general public when we are in the shelters. Let us be each other's brother. Let's be each other's keeper. Let us work collectively in ensuring that we protect each other and so that we can all have an enhanced shelter management experience.
Okay, gentlemen, let me thank you for joining us on Talking Points this morning as we looked at shelter management. All the best. I'm hoping to see you all again. Of course, during the hurricane season, there's a lot more areas that we can focus on, and I'm hoping that this can be done. It's a relatively quiet period now, right? I know it was last week we had some activity, or the week before, but relatively quiet right now. So let's enjoy this, but let us always remember that we have to take it on ourselves to put the mechanisms in place on our family as well. You have a family plan, have a first aid kit. There are so many things that families can do to ensure, of course, that they are prepared in the event of a disaster. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
In September 2017, our lives here in Dominica changed forever.
DBS Radio now brings to you professional and quality live streaming services for all your funerals, special occasions, and events. Contact us today at 448-3282 or 448-3283 or email us at dbsradio@cwdom.dm. DBS Radio, your new era in broadcasting. Contact us today.